Ukraine is a country situated between Europe and Asia. This geopolitical position had an enormous influence in the development of present-day Ukraine, its ethnos and people. The making of Ukrainian ethnos was influenced by the blending of the Eastern and the Western civilizations. One of them formed on the Chernozem and forest steppe areas. These people had mostly settled lifestyle and practiced agriculture. The other one formed in the Great Steppes, where nomads raised their cattle. At the start of Bronze Age, an outstanding archaeological culture has developed in these lands, Trypillia. The people of this culture, in addition to farming, had mastered craftsmanship. At about the same time, the steppe was populated by the people of Sredny Stog archaeological culture. Both these cultures were centered around raising cattle, even though agriculture was also known to them. These are Cimmerians, the first nomadic Iranian people on the territory of the present-day Ukraine. Currently, nothing remains of their settlements except the graves, but their mentions and descriptions by the ancient Greek Polish states emerge on the territory of the present-day Ukraine, making contact with the Great Scythia. Herodotus divides them into three groups: the royal Scythians, the nomadic Scythians, cattle farmers, and crop farmer Scythians. Cattle farmers lived in the steppes and raised cattle. Crop farmers populated the forest steppes and were master craftsmen. The nomads Sarmatians and the farmer Veneti, both considered the descendants of Scythians, lived nearby and fought side by side. The Great Migration period begins, which led to the resettlement of Slavs. This is also the period when the first mention of Kyiv was noted, the present-day capital of Ukraine. Kyiv, placed in the middle of the trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks, becomes the center uniting the Slavic tribes. The tale of the bygone years tells that in these years, Askald, the prince of Kiev, had raided Constantinople. This is also when written records started mentioning Rus and Russian lands, with the center in Kiev. Neighbors to the Kiev princes were Khazars, raiding the lands of Rus, but the princes of Kiev, Askald, Oleg, and Igor, had fought against them. Sviatoslav the Brave had finally defeated the aggressors and formed a military alliance with the local nomadic peoples. Rus in its formative period was a state of landowners, with the princes at the head. The rule of Volodymyr the Great and his son Yaroslav the Wise is considered the dawn of Kievan Rus. In this period, the Rus adopts Christianity and stands on the same level as other European countries, but its main partner is still the Byzantine Empire. After Yaroslav the Wise, Prince of Kiev, together with Polovtsians, had conquered the territory all the way to the Baltic Sea, Rus became one of the most powerful countries of Europe. In the same period, the Trident crest appears. These lands start to be referred as Ukraine in the chronicles. Rus is assaulted by the Golden Horde, led by the Mongolian ruler Genghis Khan and his heirs. The year of the first grand battle at the Kalka River. The united army of Rus and Polovtsians was defeated, but this temporarily stopped the advance of the Horde deeper into the country and into Europe. Later, led by the great prince Danilo Romanovich, the Rus had protected Volhynia, Halych, and Podolia. Prince Danilo had to defend against the Horde from the east and against Teutons and the Polish from the west. He was crowned the king of Ruthenia, and the Rus became the kingdom of Ruthenia for over 100 years. Prince Algirdas defeated the Golden Horde in the Battle of Blue Waters and freed the lands of the Rus. At the same time, the troops of the Rus had first started flying the blue and yellow flag. The Lithuanian period of the Rus is often called the Quiet Expansion, because their rule was based on the principle, we change nothing old and add nothing new. At the end of the century, the Grand Principality of Ruthenia had absorbed the borderland steppes, ruled by the Polovtsian dynasty of Mamai. Crimean Tatars, descendants of the Black Sea Polovtsians, created their own country, the Crimean Khanate, led by the Khan Haji Giray. The Khanate was forced to look for strong patrons, and they sought the protection of the Ottoman Empire. A new state emerged in the Polovtsian lands around the Dnieper River, the Zaporizhzhyan Cossack host. The inhabitants called themselves Cossacks, and their capital was called Sich. Traditional date of the founding of the first Sich. It was built on the Horditsa island by the Prince Dmitro Baida Vishnevetsky. Muscovian attempts to conquer the Grand Principality of Ruthenia forced it to ally with Poland into a federal Commonwealth, Rzeczpospolita, which included Ukrainian lands. The Zaporizhzhian host asserted its right to the territory of Rus with the force of arms. Kosinski and Nalivaiko waged war against the Rzeczpospolita that was gladly joined by the local rebels. This left an outstanding mark on the history of Ukrainian Cossacks. Under the rule of Petro Sahaydachny, the Sich spread its influence over Kiev and signed the peace treaty with Rzeczpospolita. When Poland waged another war against Cossacks, they had allied with the Crimean Tatars. The Zaporizhzhian host helped to defend the eastern borders of the Khanate, and the Crimeans supported the Cossacks in the wars for their Ruthenian heritage. Bogdan Khmelnitsky, together with Crimean Khan Islam III Giray, had recaptured the lands that were historically called Ukraine and united them in one state, known as the Hetmanate. As a result, Rzeczpospolita allied with Muscovy against the Hetmanate. For 50 years, the young Ukrainian state, together with the Crimea, had waged war for its independence. This war had some great victories. Ivan Vygovsky's Cossacks, together with the cavalry of Muhammad IV Giray, crushed the Muscovian armies at Konotop. Hetman Doroshenko, with the help of Khan Adil Giray, chased away the invaders and ended the internal conflicts that had lasted for 7 years. Hetman Ivan Mazepa took the left bank of the Dnieper River from Poland and allied with Sweden and Crimea, uniting with them against Moscow. Hetman Pilip Orlik, together with the Cossack Council, created and signed the first Ukrainian constitution, and also, together with the Crimeans, defeated the Russian armies at the Prut River. However, the enemies ended up splitting the former lands of the Rus among themselves. Zaporizhzhian armies joined the Crimea. After the division of Rzeczpospolita, Western Ukrainian territories ended up as part of Austria. They were called the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria, the heirs of the Ruthenian kingdom. Catherine II destroyed the Zaporozhian Sich, at the same time aiming at the Crimean Khanate. Russia started exterminating and evicting the Crimeans and the Nogais and the Cossacks of the Dnieper. Some of the Zaporizhzhians formed the Danubian Sich under the Ottomans. Under the hand of Moscow, the Buch and the Black Sea Cossacks were formed. With time, Russian government had moved the Cossacks into Azov and Kuban, exterminating almost all Nogais who lived there. To solve the question of Ukraine and Crimea once and for all, Russia started erasing the language, the culture, and the traditions of Cossacks. The Ukrainian intelligentsia opposed the destruction of Ukrainian culture in multiple ways, opening amateur Ukrainian schools, educational circles, publishing books. Taras Shevchenko became the symbol of Ukrainian revival. Over time, secret political societies started to form. Pavel Chubinsky and Mikhailo Verbitsky wrote the Hymn of the Future Ukraine. Unable to withstand the war with Ukraine, Russian Empire collapsed, and our people created the allied Ukrainian and Crimean People's Republics. Mikhailo Hrushevsky was elected head of the Ukrainian Central Rada, and the Central Secretariat, the first government, was led by Vladimir Vinichenko. Crimean People's Republic was destroyed by the Russian communists, and the Ukrainian one became the Ukrainian state, led by Pavlo Skoropadsky. After the conclusion of the World War I, Ukraine restored its independence and the name Ukrainian People's Republic, UNR. The head of the state was Simon Petlura. At the same time, Ukrainian rebels in the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria formed the Western Ukrainian People's Republic, which joined the UNR. The united UNR waged war on 3 fronts, but unfortunately lost. Ukrainian lands were once again split between Poland and Bolshevik Russia. Russia has again increased the terror against Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. They were thrown into prisons, evicted, starved. Before the start of World War II, the borders of Europe were redrawn. Ukrainians of Carpathian Mountains used this opportunity to create and defend for a few months the small Carpathian Ukraine, led by Avgustin Voloshin. During the German occupation, Ukrainians had twice tried to restore the nation in Lviv and in Kyiv, under the leadership of Stepan Bandera and Yaroslav Stetsko, but the Germans had squashed these attempts. In return, Ukrainians had created the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA. Ukrainian underground state was formed, led by Kyrylo Smak, and its chief authority, Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council. The army of this state, UPA, under the command of Roman Shukhevych, fought against the Germans, and then for a whole decade against the strongest empire of the world, the Soviet Union. Political liberation movement begins. Communists make concessions. They annex, but in reality reunite, the historically connected Crimea and Ukraine, relax the political, language, and cultural repressions. As a result, the Communist Empire didn't survive the war with Ukraine and collapsed, just like their predecessor occupants. Independence of Ukraine was restored. During the 30 years of independent Ukraine, formation of Ukrainian nation had completed.
Проголосити 24 серпня 1991 року Україну незалежною демократичною державою.
The hybrid war started with the annexation of the Crimea, and parts of Luhansk and Donetsk regions fell under the control of the terrorist forces. Supported by Russia, they adopted the names LNR and DNR. Russia officially recognized the LDNR. Russia started invading Ukraine, aiming to conquer its territories. Fights in Mariupol happened. Civilian population suffered at the hands of the Russian army. A theater and a maternity hospital were bombed. People are forced to stay in the cellars without water, food, light, or heat. Children, women, and elderly died. Streets are littered with the dead civilians. Events in Kiev region were no less terrifying, namely in Irpen, Bucha, Hostomel, and Vorzel. Retreating Russian army ties the hands of the local population and executes them point blank. Cases of gang rape of children, teenagers, and women were reported. Cruel murder of civilians, looting, robbery, torture. Over 70% of Russian population support this war. History repeats itself. But our struggle for independence continues, and we will certainly win. Glory to Ukraine.